kita dah membentangkan overview tentang aspek-aspek penting dari segi perubahan iklim, perhutanan, kepentingan melindungi hutan di Malaysia, aset kita untuk mitigasi perubahan iklim dan juga konsep-konsep pemberian hijau lah. Okay. Jadi untuk minggu ni keempat, kita zoom in sikit lah pada project level. So I'm going to off my camera to save the bandwidth. Jadi kalau ada apa-apa masalah, please put in the chat or my friends from NBS can WhatsApp me. Kalau internet drop ke apa ke, nanti saya pun membentang to myself. A bit weird kan? So I will start now, and today's session will be in Bahasa and English. Again, like last week I said, a lot of the concept is quite technical, all in English, so we will try our best to find the Bahasa words for some of these technical terms. Okay, so I will start and I'll off my camera. Okay, di pada hari ini topik kita untuk webinar keempat ni is 3 topik macam struktur minggu lain yang last few weeks. Number 1, how to develop forest carbon project, bagaimana membangunkan projek karbon hutan, how to determine project outcomes, okay, bagaimana menentukan hasil projek ataupun manfaat ataupun impact daripada projek carbon, and is carbon financing feasible, okay, is pembayaran daripada karbon dapat dilaksanakan, and bolehkah pembayaran karbon atau green financing menghasilkan dana yang mencukupi untuk melindungi hutan sambil menghasilkan keuntungan. Okay, these are the 3 topics today. Memang I think number 3 is the most interesting one that everybody want to know the answer kan. Is it really feasible? Is it sustainable? Can we raise funding from protecting forests? And you must stay till the end of the webinar to find out. Okay, we take it step by step. Jadi first we want to recap the key concept from the webinar, right? In webinar 1, pada webinar pertama we covered konsep-konsep about perubahan iklim. Jadi yang ni pada tahap global lah. What is climate change? Why is it important? Apakah respon kerajaan negara? We talk about UNFCCC where all the countries are negotiating on what they should do to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We also spoke about Paris Agreement and the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions. Jadi all the kerajaan around the world, they made commitment lah on how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And number 2, from Prof. Ruben and Dylan, we talk about ecosystem services, alright, kaitan perubahan iklim dengan fokus kepada perhutanan. Okay, what is the connection between perubahan iklim and biodiversity? Some examples in Malaysia, kaedah-kaedah menguruskan biodiversity dengan lebih baik, umpan dan lestari. And really our focus so far is climate change, forestry, protection, and green financing. If you can see from our webinar series, the way we structure it is, number 1, we global level, national level, and we zoom in into Malaysia. In Malaysia, we look at forest. Forest is our asset. Aset penting di Malaysia untuk mitigasi perubahan iklim. Forest can capture carbon if we protect it. If we protect it, we can meet our target at the national level. And then the sesi ketiga, we talk about pembayaran hijau. This is the important aspect. So climate change is important. We should protect forests, protect biodiversity, but who's going to pay for all this? Okay, so we spoke about pembayaran hijau. So some of the issue is that kos-kos untuk melindungi hutan biasanya dibayar oleh kerajaan negeri, alright? So sometimes this represents kehilangan kos peluang, loss of opportunity cost, and also tambahan lagi kos menguruskan projek pemeliharaan atau pemuliharaan. So if we protect areas, we are taking away assets or natural resource that generates revenue for the state, and also extra funding needs to be made available to manage and protect these areas. So we shared a few examples from around the world, from Indonesia and other places. There ada peluang untuk mendapatkan dana dari sektor swasta. Can we get private sector to help states protect more forests. So, you know, this sort of the structure of our webinar up to now. So today we focus pada tahap project. So I said kita mula pada tahap global, tahap negara, tahap negeri. Tahap negeri we focus on who pays for it mainly, what are the barriers lah and gaps. Jadi webinar keempat kita fokus at the project level, okay, Terengganu and Forest Carbon Project. So how to develop a project, bagaimana membangunkan projek karbon hutan, you know, we are focused on pasaran sukarela, what is the project structure, you know, what is the we will speak about carbon right and legal framework, hak kepada karbon dan struktur undang-undang. How to determine climate outcomes, you know, bagaimana menentukan hasil project carbon. So there's three main impact ataupun manfaat from these types of projects that needs to be measured ataupun diukur. It's climate, community, and biodiversity. And number 3 is carbon financing feasible. Adakah pembiayaan karbon dapat dilaksanakan, right? So there's a lot of costs untuk melindungi, memelihara dan memulihkan hutan. There's also kehilangan kos peluang. You know, if we set aside an area for protection, means we cannot log it or convert it to plantation anymore. So a lot of important questions we need to answer before we commit to a project. So we will go to our first topic, bagaimana membangunkan projek karbon hutan. So just to recap, you know, to imbas kembali how carbon offsetting work. Alright, so companies dengan jejak karbon yang telah membuat komitmen net zero atau sifar zero jejak karbon or carbon footprint, you know, they want to offset their carbon footprint. Maybe it's voluntary, secara sukarela, ataupun based on regulations. So in some countries, there are things like carbon tax. So companies need to offset their footprint or introduce strategy to reduce their footprint. This like I said, you know, all the kerajaan around the world, they make commitments to reduce their footprint, their carbon footprint, to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So these companies, they can invest in carbon offset project, you know, they can melabur dalam projek pengurangan pelepasan gas kacau hijau or GHG. Some of the examples of these types of projects are renewable energy or tenaga hijau, waste management or forestry project perhutanan, like a restoration project, avoided deforestation. Right, so these projects will generate carbon credits that can be sold and retired. So projek-projek ini akan menjanakan carbon credit yang boleh dijual beli ataupun disara. So when we say disara is the companies can purchase these credits to offset their footprint. Okay, so carbon credit boleh mengimbangi pelepasan GHG daripada operasi company-company ini untuk mencapaikan pelepasan karbon sifar bersih. So the target of net zero. So in terms of commitment carbon sifar bersih or net zero commitment, last week I shared a video. You know, Malaysia has a target of net zero by 2050, and they will also be introducing new policies ataupun dasar-dasar baru and new frameworks, rangkai kerja baru, to help Malaysia achieve the target of net zero. So right now there are no, you know, just announced, so there's no clear framework yet, but we can look at other countries and see, you know, it might be things like carbon tax, it might be things like regulating the price of carbon offset, framework for developing project. And also besides Malaysia, there are swasta also, private companies who have commitment carbon sifar bersih. For example, Petronas and TNB, they've publicly announced that they have net zero target as well. So these are the, we call it market-based solution ataupun to mitigate climate change. Just a recap on how carbon offset works. So what are the mechanism? What are the contoh-contoh pasaran carbon? All right. So what are the mechanism pasaran karbon antarabangsa? All right. So there's a few that's negotiated at the global level. So there's Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. So Kyoto Protocol was from 2008 and 2020, and Paris Agreement will be from 2021 onwards for implementation. Okay, Corsia is targeted at the airline industry. So the airline industry have also committed to offset the footprints of travel. So either the cost will be eventually borne by the consumers, but we can see a trend lah. It's about the whole world working together to try and mitigate climate change and try to avoid a 2-degree scenario like Norizan covered in the beginning. So there's a lot of commitments being made by different countries and even by the private sector to reduce their footprint. So jadi yang ni at the international level ataupun pada tahap pasaran karbon antarabangsa, this is what we call compliance market mechanism, whereby it's committed and regulated. Okay, here are all the different articles that's relevant to carbon offsetting for Kyoto Protocol that led into CDM or Clean Development Mechanism. I think that's going to be replaced with in Paris Agreement soon. And this is the compliance market under UNFCCC. So what this means is, the different countries, they may have bilateral agreement. So, for example, Norway and Indonesia, right? So Indonesia committed to reducing deforestation and the carbon footprint, and Norway will compensate them or provide incentive for them if they reach those targets. So that's what we mean by compliance under UNFCCC in some cases. And for the Paris Agreement, which Malaysia is a signatory for, there are still negotiations underway under UNFCCC. For Corsia as well, a lot of these are still being developed in terms of framework rangkai kerja, how it should operate, how to coordinate across jurisdiction. All of it is still work in progress for the compliance market. Okay. But for the voluntary market, which is non-compliance, so pasaran sukarela, where companies voluntarily want to offset their footprint, this has been ongoing for about between 10 to 15 years. Again, it's all voluntary. Companies who want to offset their footprint can purchase carbon offsets for various reasons. Sometimes because of consumer pressure, or sometimes it's also there's regulation where they are from, but they cannot buy carbon offset credits in their own country, so they purchase credits elsewhere. But just to summarize here, the various examples of pasaran carbon offset. But today I will focus on the voluntary carbon market. So in terms of pasaran carbon sukarela and the different standards, okay, there are a lot of standards. Banyak standard di pasaran sukarela, tapi yang paling popular is Vera VCS. Okay, and there are all types of projects, like renewable energy, waste management, and restoration. It is the most traded and the most highest demand from the private sector. So I spoke about this last week a bit on what kind of credits the private sector are looking for. So right now, definitely VCS and CCB are under Vera, is the most in highest demand. And just to recap, based on the standards under Vera, what is the project eligibility, or dari segi technical, bagaimana projek boleh mencapaikan certification di bawah VCS. Okay, so ada 4 syarat untuk memenuhi kelayakan. Number 1 is additional. There's no word for it, so I think it's penambahan is the word for additional. Jadi projek mesti menunjukkan bahawa pengurangan GHG ataupun gas kaca hijau tidak dapat dicapai tanpa projek tersebut ataupun tanpa hasil daripada penjualan carbon credit. So this is additional. It's a very important concept that the manfaat or the benefits, climate benefits, cannot be achieved without the project or funding from the sales of carbon credit. Number 2, the output must be real, measurable, and conservative. Penggunaan GHG mesti dibukti, diukur, dan dipantau dengan menggunakan metodologi yang konservatif yang telah disahkan oleh Vera. So Vera have a list of methods that projects need to follow, and they must be also audited, which I will share later on. Syarat ketiga ataupun kriteria ketiga is permanence, alright, ataupun pengurangan GHG mesti dikekal sepanjang hayat projek ataupun dijangka masa panjang. Okay, so if we set up a carbon offset project, we must ensure that the benefit is there at least throughout the project period and beyond that. Jadi we cannot protect an area for 30 years and then we log it or convert it after 30 years. Means you lose all the carbon benefit. Jadi we have to avoid those kind of scenario. And number 4, project independent verification and transparency. Project needs to be verified ataupun ditentukan oleh pihak auditor that is independent. So external third party will come in to verify all the climate benefits. Right? Misalkan dari segi manfaat GHG, not just for climate change, but also other benefits that's generated by the project. This is the 4 important criteria to develop a project. The other one that's important dari segi konsep kalau kita nak membangunkan project carbon is baseline versus project scenario. So what is the baseline? What is the starting point? So we go to the potential area now. What is the land use plan? What is the condition of the forest, condition of communities nearby the forest, condition of the wildlife? Okay, jadi there will be 2 scenario. So we will predict, we can make a projection unjuran di bawah scenario business as usual versus project scenario. So here, for example, it can be maybe baseline scenario ataupun business as usual scenario is logging or plan conversion. And then we want to introduce the project scenario, avoided logging, pembalakan versus scenario pembalakan yang dielakkan. Okay. This is a very important concept because this is how we measure the project outcome ataupun manfaat daripada project carbon. So there's the net impact from the baseline scenario dan net impact from the project scenario. So based on these 2 scenario, we need to predict the GHG emission ataupun pengeluaran gas GHG, any impact to the community, and any impacts to biodiversity. This is the very important concept, okay, for developing carbon offset project, because the difference between project scenario and business as usual scenario is how we justify the project getting certified, how we can verify the carbon credit yang dijanakkan project ni. So I will use a case study later to help us better understand how to measure outcome. But before that, let's talk about proses pembangunan project di bawah standard Vera BCSCCB. Okay, so in front here is the years. So year 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until year 30. So before we start a project, we must do a feasibility study to understand if the project can meet the criteria. So step 1 is choose methodology, pilih kaedah yang betul untuk project. Who's the project owner, decide the project type, conduct a feasibility assessment to see how much carbon credits can be generated, what is the budget, what is the impact of the project. Yang kedua, once you have a project already, you need to validate project description. Jadi this is proses pengesahan di bawah standard Vera, right? Who will come in and mengesahkan dokumen project oleh juru audit luar atau third party audit will come in and just verify that your project meets the standards criteria. Okay. When are the credits generated? Okay? Bila kredit akan dijanakan? This is also can happen every year or in regular intervals. Okay, so when the project wants to issue carbon credit, there's another verification process. Okay, kredit akan dihasilkan oleh project setelah hasilnya disahkan. Okay, so an auditor will come in maybe on an annual basis, setiap tahun atau secara berkala, dengan jangka masa maksimum 5 tahun. So within 5 years, you need to verify your project outcome. Jadi apa-apa manfaat climate, community atau biodiversity yang telah dijanakkan oleh project mesti disahkan dalam jangka masa 5 tahun when it was generated. And then the credits are also dikeluarkan setelah aktiviti dijalankan. Okay, so you cannot sell future credit. Must be after the year has end. Activity telah, you've already done the activity, you've already measured the manfaat or the outcome, and then you can get an auditor to come in to verify the outcome. Okay. Once the outcome telah disahkan or verified by an auditor, you can submit the documents, and then Vera will approve your issuance of carbon credit, and then you can start selling the carbon credit. So you can imagine the carbon credit is like a CGL lah, okay? CGL di bawah Vera that you can sell to other companies so that they can use it to offset disara oleh companies untuk mencapai their internal target lah, net zero and all that. So this is the life cycle of our project. You know? Choose which method, get audited, get certified, and then when you want to issue the carbon credit, you call in the auditor, and then they will double check all your project outcome, all your manfaat, your monitoring protocol. They need to make sure that the credits are real, you know. Otherwise, anyone can just simply say they create credit kan. Dari segi additionality and baseline scenario, right? So we can see that before year zero, you know, it will still be the original baseline scenario. So for example, deforestation, degradation, biodiversity loss. But at year zero, after you get validated, the project is managed as a forest carbon project. Jadi between the baseline and the project scenario, you know, instead of deforestation, it's managed for protection. Maybe we introduce community program, increase wildlife enforcement. Seperti contoh yang I shared last week di Indonesia kan, Rimba Raya. They use carbon financing to manage important forest orangutan habitat. But at the same time, duit yang dijanakan oleh the sales of carbon credit is also used for community program. It's not covered in the video, so they showed how they introduced better stove, but beyond that, there's also other programs like livelihood programs. They also build schools. They provide clean water. So the funding that's generated from the sales of carbon credit, it's not just to protect the forest. It can also protect biodiversity, help communities in the ground. But that's Indonesia lah. Malaysia is a very different scenario, a very different landscape as well. But later we'll show a Terengganu case study or example and see if we can develop a similar project here in Terengganu. Yep. So you can up to the project owner when they want to verify the carbon emissions reductions, because that is when the carbon credit is generated. So you can do it every year or every 2 years, but must be within 5 years lah when you want to issue carbon credit. Okay, so dari segi pengesahan, alright, so project owner will need to demonstrate that they achieve all the criteria in a project design document ataupun PDD. Okay, di bawah garis panduan BCS CCB dan proses kelulusan, projek mesti memenuhi syarat dan memberikan justifikasi untuk hasil-hasil projek yang diramalkan. Okay, so if you say you are going to protect forests and reduce GHG emissions and protect 50 species of animal, you must provide the justification in this document. Okay. So in this document, there's 4 main chapters. So general project details, you know, project design, reka bentuk dan plan project. What is the baseline scenario and justification for additionality or tambahan? Status undang-undang dan hak harta. So who owns the land? There needs to be proof as well. Dari segi manfaat ataupun impact, alright, there's 3 main ones. As everyone here know, I think everyone here expert in developing carbon project already. Memang every week we talk about climate, community, and biodiversity. Sorry, that's a typo. But yeah, there's 3 main things: is climate, community, dan biodiversity. And for those 3 criteria, it's the same concept. What is the baseline scenario? So what will happen without the project? What is the for example, pelepasan GHG tanpa project? What is the positive impact from the project? What is the monitoring protocol? So apakah kaedah pemantauan to measure these impacts? And are there any additional benefit selain daripada net positive impact? Like I said in Rimba Raya, you know, they build school, they provide clean water to communities. This is not related to climate change, but there's additional benefit that's being generated by the project through the sales of carbon credit. Okay. Why this document is important is ini akan di-audit dan projek akan diukur berdasarkan hasil ataupun manfaat yang there was juran manfaat daripada plan-plan dan rancangan inilah. So this is a very important document. So the main one, I think the main question is also, they will ask, chapter 1, they already ask you, who owns the land, okay? Why is it important? Because they want to avoid a scenario whereby people develop project without the consent of the landowner. I think the situation in Malaysia is a bit different. This is more for other places where there's a lot of community land. For example, like again, I always use Indonesia. There's a lot of communities living nearby forests, and they are the drivers of deforestation. Kan maybe they nak buka kawasan baru, want to set up oil palm plantation, smallholder. Jadi land ownership is a very important concept because we want to make sure the project is fair to landowners. But I think in Malaysia, a lot of the forest is under the jurisdiction of the state government. So it's not really a real issue as long as the project owner can show that who owns the land and who has the hak milik to the carbon. Okay, so these are because there's no carbon project in Peninsular Malaysia right now. So there's no, for example, special land classification kan untuk project carbon. Memang it's a new concept that hasn't been tested in Peninsular Malaysia yet. But some key aspect is for land ownership is siapa yang memiliki tanah itu, hak atas tanah needs to be clear, mesti jelas. Project juga perlu mengambil kira any masalah hak tanah and kemungkinan konflik dan ancaman terhadap hasil pemeliharaan in the future. So project needs to also take into account any potential risks of land ownership in the future. Okay, and the last one is proof of title, bukti hak milik yang jelas mengenai hak penggunaan, manfaat hak penggunaan over the project benefit. Okay, so for GHG, the project requires a clear proof of title of the project owner, rights of use of the benefit generated by the project. So what this means is very simple: who owns the land and who have rights to the carbon. So there's still, we need to better understand this criteria and see how we can apply it in states in Peninsular Malaysia. I think forest comes under the jurisdiction of the state, as well as the natural resource and ecosystem services produced by this forest. So we can safely assume that the state government is the rightful owner of the benefits generated from this project as well. This is the concept I want to share with the audience today. Who owns the hak carbon is with whoever owns the land. In this case, for Terengganu, we assume is the state of Terengganu. But just to share example from Indonesia. So in Indonesia, they have their own legislation and licenses that's specific for ecosystem services ataupun perkhidmatan ekosistem. So there's ecosystem restoration concession. Yang ini, this is licenses given to private sector by the Indonesian government to manage an area for restoration. There's also RED Plus project concession, very similar to number 1. Number 3, there's also community forest initiative. So community forest, so the license is awarded to the community, so they can manage it for protection, 35-year license. Okay. So memang so in Indonesia there are lesen-lesen khas yang diberikan untuk aktiviti perlindungan dan pemulihan. Alright, and then project ini membolehkan they can obtain sijil VCS CCB ataupun Plan Vivo untuk menghasilkan kredit yang telah disahkan untuk membiayai aktiviti pemeliharaan from carbon credits or from, like I shared last week, from the oil palm supply chain as well. So this is an example from Indonesia, right? So you have license that is awarded to a private company to manage an area for restoration and protection, and how they generate funding to pay for management is through the sales of carbon credit. All right. So this is an example from Indonesia, how it works there, how pembiayaan hijau works in Indonesia for restoration project. So in Malaysia, right, what is the land classification and the baseline scenario? All right, there's 5 main land classification. All right, protected area, kawasan terlindung, forest reserve, HSK, agri land, tanah pertanian, state land forest, hutan yang belum diwatakan di bawah land code as a HSK, and also private land. So the type of these lands, there's a state park, national park, For forest reserve, it's logging concessions or timber plantations, agri-land, plantations, oil palm. Sometimes there is stranded asset as well. State land forests, no, either under logging concession and private land. So give me 1 minute. My cat is back again. Aduh, kucing also want to learn about pemberian hijau. Okay.
Okay, doktor.
Dah dihalaukan. Jadi yang ni memang is the land classification lah for potential project areas in Terengganu.
Doktor
Okay.
Sorry. Before
Yeah.
that, maybe we can open to the question kalau ada siapa-siapa.
This is the last slide for this topic, and then I'll open for question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Jadi, based on this existing land classification and the plan, right? Can we reclassify these areas for protection? So, baseline scenario versus alternative scenario. So, in terms of additionality atau tambahan, can it be avoided deforestation, avoided degradation, improve forest management or restoration? All right. So, what are the opportunities if we look at existing and then reclassifying these main areas from production to protection to justify developing a carbon offset project lah. Okay. So this is the first section. We talk about standards, Vera, criteria, standard Vera VCS. So in the next section, how to determine project outcome or how to menunjukkan manfaat project carbon. We will talk about Terengganu and we'll use a case study. But before we start, if there's any question, we can answer them now lah.
Ada soalan Ada, kalau tak ada saya nak tanya satu soalan lah doktor.
Okay.
Okay. Berkenaan dengan the company, we have a lot of industrial player in, of course in Terengganu pun kita ada ramai lah industrial player. So how do we can increase their interest to do a project in Terengganu? Macam mana, sebab kita tak ada any legal binding to the company itself. Kita tak ada any act that regarding the carbon credit and GHG emission and so on. So macam mana kita nak tingkatkan kesedaran mereka untuk invest in this kind of project? That is my question. Thank you.
Okay, I understood. So let's say we look at the private sector entities in Terengganu, okay? I think if we can try to be maybe strategic about it. We see who has the highest footprint, who has the commitment, sifat bersih, and net zero commitment. Okay lah, we share the obvious example Petronas kan. Jadi they already made a public announcement for commitment net zero. We have to first understand what is the strategy. I think like I shared last week, memang kalau orang internally reduce their footprint, that's the best, and offset is memang last option lah kalau kita nak mencapaikan komitmen sifat bersih net zero target. So those like the main players are like Petronas. An ideal place. A, they have operation here, and B, there is opportunity to develop this type of projects here that can generate offset and then get their participation. So instead of us telling them what to do, I think we can promote more collaboration. Jadi, like this webinar is meant to help increase the knowledge about carbon credit. And then after this, maybe in the next phase of our engagement, we can look at bringing in private sector involvement in this kind of webinar ataupun workshop to do two things. Memang understand what is the strategy sebagai kerajaan negeri untuk perubahan iklim, pemberian hijau, but also what is the strategy of private sector and see where we can collaborate. Memang I think if we have more open forum between government and private sector, we can start to explore the different option lah. Selain daripada Petronas, maybe like oil and gas company yang ada jejak footprint yang besar and commitment, we can also look at industry commodity like oil palm. Maybe they have stranded asset. Jadi last week kan I cover commitment daripada pihak-pihak supply chain oil palm. no more deforestation, after a certain cut off date. Jadi maybe there are companies in Terengganu, I don't know, we have to double check, yang ada, they have the concession, but they cannot convert it to plantation, because if they convert it, they will be punished or they will be excluded from supply chain, and the mill maybe don't want to buy from them anymore. Jadi then we have, landowners in the private sector dari segi commodity who may have potential areas that can be developed into carbon offset project. Jadi, again, it comes down to sharing our strategy lah sebagai, landowner and land custodian of the land, state government. What are the issues and how we can work with private sector lah to help everybody achieve their target. So, Kerajaan Negeri can secure green financing for protection, maybe get profit from protecting forests, and we also help private sector to achieve their commitment carbon lah. So I think that's my recommendation lah, how to improve.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I have some question here. Thank you, Doctor, for the interesting presentation. But from what we know that because that the ownership of the land in the state is mostly is by state. Let's say if you're doing this sort of thing, a carbon credit or in terms of the ecosystem services, that how is the state going to be benefited? Because that's normally the payment is asked them to start, mean that the payment must be some from some of the concession and so on. So how the state going to be benefits? And sometimes there is the federal money federal pay to the state, but it is still within the government coffer. So that how to make the state are more interested in involved in these ecosystem services and so on. And my second question is on the no doubt that this carbon trading is one of the very good. Of course, it has been long, but it is a lot of the fields story also in the developed and also some of the developing country. But maybe that maybe the doctor can shed some light on how that Malaysia can be a successful one. Because that before this, I think I heard there is a collapsing of the carbon market overseas as well. But with the carbon credits or carbon market in the China, I don't know, there is a new carbon market in the China, in the Shanghai Stock Exchange, not mistaken. And maybe that they will shed some light, or maybe there's some push factor for this carbon market trading, especially in the developing country. And my another observation is that when we're talking about the carbon credit or the greenhouse gases, that normally that we target the plantations and so on. But at the same time, I think that apart from the maybe at the beginning of the deforestation, converting of the forest to plantation, but after that, I think plantation also they contribute to the carbon sequencing, because the plant they use a lot of carbon dioxide for the protection and so on. So in how we're going to be how to say offset this, and plantations actually they are contributing to the carbon sequencing, mean they absorb the carbon dioxide and reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So but most of the time that we're looking at the international arena or eluding the carbon market, all this and that they are keep targeting on the plantations, on the oil palm plantation and so on. So what's your opinions on this? That's my question. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the question. Very good question. So number one is benefit to state government. Number two, just trends in pasaran carbon. There's a market crash 15 years ago, I think, and sort of other examples around the world. And number three is besides avoided deforestation, other projects like restoration project, tree planting, which you are right, they do contribute to sequestering carbon from the atmosphere as well. So for number one, jadi manfaat kepada kerajaan negeri. So last week we did cover a bit on some of the problems with why there's forest loss or forest degradation to in Malaysia. The main one is really, like I said early on, a lot of hasil to the state government comes from natural resource. Okay, it's good. It's good for pembangunan. We need to build schools and roads, but at the same time, it comes at a cost to the environment. So from these types of projects or project pemilihan hijau, we are looking at ways for, if we were to set an area for protection, an important area, wildlife habitat, for example, can we secure external funding, private sector funding, dana from pihak swasta, long term, jangka masa panjang, because normally it's short term grant or the budget is not, is not stable. So we're looking at different options, and one of it is carbon, which is the webinar today. So in the third topic today, I will talk about the manfaat to the state government. So I'll answer your question later. Number two, in terms of carbon credit price and market crash from 10, 15 years ago, I think back then the urgency was not there. Nobody made any commitment. Now there is a global commitment from all around the world, Paris Agreement. We see that maybe compliance market is going to kick in, like in Malaysia as well. CIFA 0 by 2050 means carbon tax will be introduced. That is when the demand for offset will increase. Before this, it was voluntary. Eventually, it will not be voluntary. Businesses will be punished through tax if they don't mitigate the carbon footprint. So again, I always say they need to internally reduce their footprint and then look at offsets for whatever activities they cannot mitigate. And then, like you said, a very good example from Shanghai, there's a Shanghai Carbon Index. So in China, there's a lot of carbon offset projects because they're already developing their framework or jangka kerja for achieving their net zero target 2050 as well. Australia as well also has some state governments in America, California, they have their own regulations for carbon offsets and carbon tax as well. So things are different. I think because there's urgency right now, a lot of pressure on governments to reduce the footprint, that will drive the demand for credits. And we don't foresee a reducer. Actually, every week there's a new company who reaches out to us asking if there's any projects right now, and I keep telling them, yeah, this maybe soon, maybe in the future, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But yeah, so I there are infrastructure or framework being introduced. The main reason why we don't see it crashing, but no one can predict the future, is the urgency right now. And number three, in terms of the types of project, like you said, forests, timber plantations and palm plantations also absorb carbon. But one of the key concepts that we shared in this webinars is baseline scenario and the project scenario. So if you have a forest and then you convert into oil palm, for example, or timber plantation, that is your baseline scenario. And then your project scenario, let's say you avoid the conversion. If you compare those two scenarios over 30 years, then if there is a climate benefit from the project, and then it qualifies. So like you say, for tree plantation, it's quite a popular project in China and Australia, but that is not restoration, that is afforestation. So they are creating new forests actually in areas where there's no forest. Jadi if you can imagine, the baseline is no biomass, kosong, and you plant trees, and the trees will capture carbon. And that's how you qualify for additionality or tambahan. So that's why we keep trying to introduce the concept of additionality. What is your baseline? What is your project scenario? The difference is your manfaat. So again, it's very case specific, depends on what's the standing condition and what is the alternative scenario. But yeah, tree planting can capture carbon. For example, if you set up oil palm in an area that is not forest before, technically it's climate positive because it's capturing carbon also, right? But again, it's important to realize that the difference is where the project is, what is the baseline, and what is the project scenario. So I hope that answers your question, or at least stimulate the thinking of our audience today. So thank you, Lu, for your question. Any more questions before I go to the next section? Okay, so I will proceed off my camera. Please, if you have any question, write it down. I can help answer them at the end of the next topic or at the end of the presentation.
Baik, proceed.
Okay, jadi topik kedua webinar minggu ni is how to determine project outcome. Jadi how to measure, mengukur manfaat from carbon offset project. This is the important concept again because it relates back to additionality ataupun kriteria tambahan untuk membangunkan project carbon. So first is how do we identify? So how do we identify areas to protect and conserve? Okay, this was covered by Ruben and Dylan in minggu kedua. But just to combine the concept kan, So we can look at initiative at the landscape level. So for example, ini rancangan guna tanah, dasar-dasar negara atau negeri, master plan, plan induk, any kawasan sensitif ekologi, and also look at sasaran untuk mengembangkan kawasan perlindungan. We know that Malaysia has targets for setting up PAs. Are there any state targets as well? Last 2 weeks there was brought up what's our dasar to protect more areas. And then we look at the current baseline scenario. What is the current condition? What is the existing plan? Is it managed for logging, managed as a PA? Is it managed as a production? All right. Then we can explore what is the alternative scenario lah. So we can combine these three concepts. If you can imagine, it's like a 3 layer kan. Layer at tahap landscape, so very big areas. What are the plans in the future? Then at the potential project area, what is the current classification? And yang ketiga, what is the project scenario? If we were to change it from, for example, production to protection, or maybe there is unplanned deforestation that we can stop. This is how we see if the project meets the criteria tambahan. So today we will use Kenyir as an example. This is the 200,000 hectare Kenyir catchment. So disclaimer before I go to the next slide. Okay, these are all just andaian and assumption, unjuran based on numbers that is available freely. But I think today we use it as an exercise to test the new concept that we have learned over the last 4 weeks on how to develop a carbon offset project. And hari ini kita gunakan kawasan tahan air Kenyir, the Kenyir water catchment, as a case study. So we know that at the landscape level, there are a few designations for Kenyir. We can see that it's a ESA rank 1 area, all right? So environmentally sensitive area rank 1, because it's a water catchment, it's a habitat as well. We also know it's part of the Central Forest Spine Plan, PL7, I think. It's included within the Kenyir catchment. We also know, it is an important area. It's an important tiger habitat. Right, Kenyir terletak dalam kawasan habitat harimau yang penting. It's also next to Taman Negara, the biggest PA in Malaysia. Kenyir lies it's a very important tiger landscape. This is covered also by Ruben 2 weeks ago. It's a vital habitat for many wildlife species. All right, and there's about 20 threatened species here and over 290 species of bird. There's camera trap photos from Rimba's work over the last 10 years in Kenyir. There's a lot of important wildlife inside Kenyir. Yep, it is PL7. So, it also includes PL7, which is an important ecological corridor. Right, so it's under CFS, corridor ni penting untuk menghubungkan all the forest complex in Peninsular Malaysia. And it's important as corridors because it ensures ataupun ia memastikan hutan yang mencukupi untuk menyokong populasi kehidupan liar. So this is the CFS plan in front of you. So you can see PL7 is included in the Kenyir catchment. So let's look at project outcome. All right, so what is the baseline? So we can start predicting what is the impact. So let's just say, I think, so the Kenyir catchment is mainly HSK or forest reserve. So let's assume, Buandayan, that the business as usual scenario is logging. And now we want to protect it. We want to protect it for all those reasons I shared. It's an important habitat, kawasan tahan air, important for climate change. Jadi let's just say for today's exercise, we want to protect it. So business as usual is logging, and then project scenario is avoided logging. So now we will talk about how to measure the net impact. Sorry, I jumped it. But yeah, so like I just mentioned, shared, it's part of CFS, Tiger Landscape, ESA1, buffer to Taman Negara. And currently right now in the Kenyir catchment, there are 2 land classification. So it's the Kenyir State Park and Hutan Simpan, our forest reserve. So this is our baseline scenario, okay? So first project outcome is climate. To recap, carbon is captured as biomass in vegetation, organic matter, and soil. We covered this in week 1 and week 3. how carbon is captured by forests. And the main way we measure is through biomass ataupun biogeosim. Okay. There are many ways we can use to measure and forecast biomass, biogeosim, and then also pengeluaran gas GHG. Alright. So, biogeosim hutan digunakan untuk mengukur dan memantau senario pengurangan pelepasan gas GHG. Alright. So what that means is biomass is used to predict and measure emissions over time and reduce emissions over time. All right, so this is a map that we have developed through this project to look at biomass of forests in Kenyir and in Terengganu as well. As you can see, on the left is standing biomass in 2020. All right, so above ground biomass of Kenyir last year estimated at 44.3 million tons. Okay, and let's say we protect Kenyir for 80 years until the year 2100. Okay, the project scenario where by all forests in Kenya is protected and undisturbed for 80 years, right? So there's an increase of 16.5% of biomass if we set it aside. So this is if we use remote sensing and modeling to predict. I think this is also a useful tool that we can use for planning, which I'll talk about later. But today we focus on Kenya kan. So if we do leave it aside for protection, we can see an increase in biomass over 80 years. But because we want to secure pembiayaan hijau through carbon offset, we need to follow the specific methodology. All right. So under Vera, there's a lot of methodology. Okay. Mengelakkan penebangan hutan, avoided logging, restoration, tree planting, penanaman semula, pemeliharaan. There's also specific methods for project gambut, tanah bencah, and also for pengurusan kebakaran hutan. So there's a lot of methodologies. But because we will assume for the exercise that Kenyir is all hutan simpanan that's already earmarked for logging in the future. Okay, so we use this method, BM10, methodology for improved forest management, conversion from logged forest to protected forest. We use this methodology today. So, this is the process for measuring GHG using this method. So you check periksa apakah kaedah betul berdasarkan klasifikasi tanah. So choose the right methodology. Right. What is the project boundary? What is the parameters? Compartment data, maps, land use rights. Okay, mengumpulkan peta dan rancangan penggunaan tanah. What is the existing plan for the area to determine the baseline? And then we use that data to measure GHG in the baseline scenario and the project scenario. And then we can calculate the difference between the two scenarios. Then we also need to develop a monitoring plan. So this is the process of how, under the criteria and the guidelines on how to calculate GHG. So for this, we will use the National Forest Inventory. This is the inventory that's conducted by JPSM every 10 years to measure carbon stock in our forest reserve. And this also includes measurements for biomass. But throughout the whole Peninsula Malaysia, there are forest plots that JPSM will use to determine the stock of commercial species and also the size and growth rate of our trees in our forest in Peninsula Malaysia. Jadi based on the NFI, there are 18 forest strata yang ini memang berdasarkan aktiviti production okay, for production. So we can see that different years from logging, 1 to 10 years ago, 11 to 20 years ago, kawasan terlindung, paya gambut. So there's about 18 forest strata based on NFI. This is useful data that we can use for planning as well for GHG. Jadi what is the reduced emission scenario for Kenyir? Okay. Jadi we use the NFI data. For the project area, we look at strata data to see what is the logging history, so we can predict what is the standing biomass ataupun biogeosim based on land use history. Look at compartment data. This is to predict how much will be logged over 30 years. So it's not, they don't log everything 1 year kan. It's all done in compartments based on the annual cut limit. And based on this, we can calculate the compartment GHG emission. Okay, jadi data from biomass and timber volume data based on how much we predict will be extracted. is used to forecast atau unjuran tentang logging scenario, dan we use this data to calculate how much biogeosim is removed, and that biogeosim is used to calculate the amount of GHG gas yang dilepaskan. Okay, this is the protocol lah. Very complicated, but we don't need to go into detail today. If anyone interested, please write to UPenn, and UPenn can invite us to maybe do a more sesi technical lah selepas ni, kalau ada interest lah dari para hydrin. So for Kenyir, using this method, okay, in the logging scenario, the net GHG emission ataupun pengeluaran gas over 30 years is about 6.3 million tons CO2. Okay, this is how much will be released. In the project scenario, so let's say we manage for protection, the forest functions as a sink. So instead of releasing, it absorbs about 5.2 million tons of CO2. Jadi over the project period, for the whole of Kenyir, if we manage it for protection, again, this is based on our assumption, about 11.2 millions of CO2 will be not released into the environment. Jadi yang ni, we will say, if you compare the project scenario dengan baseline scenario, this is how much carbon will be, that will not be released because we changed the management plan. Okay? So about 11.2 million tons of CO2 lah. And then we look at Kenyir, it's not just one Kenyir. Kenyir is memang a collection of forest reserve. There's Kenyir State Park, Tembat, Petuang, Ulu Lemong, Ulu Terengganu. These are the different forest reserves in the Kenyir catchment. So we can also, at the operational level, estimate what is the reduced emissions if we protect these areas. So this is the manfaat iklim if we protect this area. Okay, so the first one, climate. Yang kedua is community. All right, Kenyir communities. Who are the communities and do they access Kenyir? All right, we need to take into account if anybody is using, any local communities are using or accessing Kenyir for various reasons. So I think based on our very high level assessment, we look at the map, we look at data banci, right? It's about 10.5 thousand people living in 19 villages within a 5 km radius, right? And there are no land claims inside Kenyir itself lah. Okay, kira all the communities are living around the project area, not inside. So that makes things a bit easier. Hak tanah is very clear. And kedua, what is their income? Right, mainly agriculture. So smallholder oil palm and rubber. This is the main source of income for these communities. So they don't really rely on accessing the forest, to extract things. Again, very different from Indonesia. But they do use Kenyir for various purposes. So fishing, in Kenyir Lake or surrounding rivers, they catch lampan, baung, tengas, sebarau, toman, kala. So if you got fishermen here in the webinar today, I'm sure you know more than me lah. What fish is there that you can catch. Kenyir is also important for recreation ataupun activity rekreasi for local community, fishing, camping, picnic, hiking. Tourism, all right, is an important activity for some of the villages, but not all. Only those who are closer to Gawi Jetty, dekat the dam, mainly houseboat operator and tour guiding. And there is some collection of non-timber forest product by local communities, mainly medicinal plant root, petai, jungle fruit, ratan. So memang there are some active use of the area. Okay, we need to take into consideration and when we design the project. All right. So this is a map we did. If you can see, the letters on the map is where locations of community use, for various purposes lah. Fishing ka, recreation ka, tourism ka, NTFP. So, it's not an empty forest. Humans actually use the Kenyir forest as well. But this is, very early data. We didn't do a full feasibility for the whole Kenyir for the webinar. It's just to introduce the concept. So, memang more information is required. Understand who the communities are. What is the socio-economic status? Are there important cultural value? All right. What is the opportunity and social risk? Okay, if we protect the area and don't let anyone enter, there's a negative impact. So we need to take into consideration their needs, and memang to collect data to inform project design, so we can generate community benefit. So just high level, we look, who are the local communities, what is their current use, what is the potential effect. I think in general it's either positive or we are not sure what the impact is. Obviously, if you're hunting anything illegal, we will stop. So it's bad for you, but good for the community, good for biodiversity. And what is the motivation, for example, if we will protect the area, are they interested in the job opportunities? Do they want more support to encourage tourism? Maybe we can introduce more regulation for access and extraction of non-timber forest product fishing. So, there's a few opportunities that we can generate from the project itself. And the last outcome, manfaat, is biodiversity. This one very short because Prof. Ruben already gave a very good presentation 2 weeks ago about some of the baseline condition of biodiversity. All right, so there's a lot of biod in Kenyir, but there's also a lot of threat from poaching. All right, how do they poach? Snares, destroying burrows, guns sometimes. What do they poach? The Malayan tiger, the pangolin, sun bear, and really it's part of the illegal trade of wildlife parts supply chain. All right, that our biod or wildlife in Kenyir is under threat from external threats of poaching. So this is covered by Ruben 2 weeks ago. So I think in the project scenario, it's very obvious kita akan make more resource available for more enforcement work, more patrol work to protect the biod in Kenyir. So we covered those 3 main outcomes of manfaat: climate, community, and biodiversity. But to summarize, in the baseline scenario is production forests, managed for logging. There is informal community use, there is poaching. And then in the alternative scenario, we want to manage it for protection. We want to introduce community livelihood programs. We want to improve enforcement. All right. Some of the potential activities that we can design or propose, manage as a carbon offset project, monitor and verify the activities, provide training or capacity building to rangers to implement enforcement work, cover the costs for patrol, and for community, work with communities to identify what are the livelihood opportunities. We can provide funding, training, or loans to support these communities. So really the project outcomes are these, right? Reduce emissions, biodiversity protection, and community impact. So if we were to set aside this area for protection, these are the outcomes. Now is the important question. How much will it cost to achieve the outcome? And can we raise enough funding or not to A, pay for these activities over 30 years? And B, can we also generate alternative revenue to the state government? So that is the next section. But before we start, maybe we can open for questions. If there's anybody in the audience who have any questions.
Ada soalan ke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Lou again here. Yeah, I just want to ask Dr. Tajang, because the sound that you show us that is a biomass method. So I'm just wondering that because when we're measuring the greenhouse gases, is there any method that we measured the amount of greenhouse gases that emit per hectare of land? So will it be a better comparison when we are looking at a pristine forest, a disturbed forest, and also that a plantation forest? Which one that they do have a better efficient in terms of the the carbon sequencing or the absorption of the greenhouse gases? That's my question on that, on the method of the measuring of the from the biomass to the amount of the absorption of the GHG. That's my wondering only. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a very good question because I think the most complicated part about developing carbon offset project is the determination of reduced emission scenario. So for land use, memang the metrics used is bioGC or biomass, and based on the land use and it's all also plot data. So like when I share my examples here when we talk about the Vera methodology, they do encourage remote sensing for prediction biomass, but all this methodology that you see in front of you, they do require ground level verification. So you use two types of data. One is we establish the plot, or if there's historical data, that's why I use NFI to determine the growth rate of the forest. So you can determine the biomass, and then based on the biomass, if you were to remove it or to plant, what is the growth rate? And that is then further equated into the different GHG gas type. So it's mainly CO2 when we talk about biomass from forests. But for example, like this methodology, VM10, they also take into account emissions from activity. So if you use a truck or a lorry or a chainsaw, you need to estimate how much fossil fuel is used. And that also contributes to the overall equation of how much emissions is emitted from the activities. But yeah, I think biomass is used in Vera projects, in FREL, in other RED Plus programs as well. It's the main input used lah. How you calculate, which calculation you use, what assumption you use, that varies lah. Depends on the standard or what the country deems is the best way to do it. So today we use NFI data, but what we do see is we can complement two things. One, we can use remote sensing like this one here, just to estimate for planning purposes. But at the project level, we need to use more specific protocol because, like I said, they will need to audit the outcomes, and it will be based on this existing methodology. But yeah, I hope I managed to answer your question. Again, it's a very technical topic. If any participants wants us to expand on this more technical topic, we can definitely organize more detailed session lah. Just put your request to UPenn, and UPenn can help organize lah. Any more questions? Okay, if no question, then I will go to the last topic for today. It's carbon financing feasible. Okay, this one is the most interesting one. Everyone, okay, carbon, wildlife, community, but show me the money. Okay, what is the bottom line? Is this pembiayaan hijau financially sustainable or not? Okay, bolehkah pembiayaan hijau carbon menghasilkan dana, enough fundings to protect forests and create profit? I think that's the important question that on everyone's mind since the beginning of this webinar. So we end with a gempak sikit lah. Okay, this is the question: yes or no? You can write down. You can share your response in the chat while I go through it. And we will share some interesting numbers. Again, these are early numbers. If we really are serious and we want to protect areas, we can do more in-depth study. Again, we can work with other experts ourselves, state government, private sector to see what is the real potential. But today, let's just look at a few assumptions, again, using Kenya as an example. So we've already, in the last section, looked at the key aspect ataupun manfaat from the project dari segi community, climate dan biodiversity. Alright, tapi apakah kos-kos untuk melaksanakan aktiviti ini untuk mencapaikan manfaat, those three manfaat? So we did a forecast budget. I won't go into detail today. It's very, very complicated, but based on best management practices and other examples in Malaysia and in the region, we estimated the cost to achieve those outcomes as about 1.1 million per year for climate change mitigation. We classify the area. We want to coordinate management and protection. We need to do the monitoring and measurement of biomass, protocol pemantauan, project certification and auditing as well. All this costs money. So we estimated at 1.1 million per year. For BioD, it's very expensive, 4.5 million per year. Why? It's a very important habitat and landscape. So we prescribe the most hardcore protocol for enhanced enforcement. Okay, jadi andaian in front of you is the highest cost we expect to manage the area for protection. And number three, $500,000 a year for community-based programs. So this is not to give to the community, but to pay for resource to help us work with community. Jadi, we need to do a lot of engaging the community. One second. Understand their needs, design program, work with other partners to help secure funding. Again, this is just a preliminary budget. We can, of course, go up or down based on the actual requirement. So we assume this is the budget lah, okay, to manage it every year. So for Kenyir, how much carbon credits can be generated? Jadi this now we did the measurement under this scenario. So we measured 11.2 million tons CO2, reduced emissions over 30 years, or 11.2 million juta reduced GHG release in the form of carbon over 30 years. But in terms of carbon credit, jadi based on the criteria or methodology from Vera, we need to minus about 10% for uncertainty, because it's all measurements, and about 10% for buffer. Buffer is just in case anything happens to the project, there's some insurance for the amount of credits that's generated. But in terms of how much carbon credit, berapa carbon credit yang dijanakan oleh project example Kenyir over 30 years is about 8.9 million tons or 8.9 million carbon credit, or about 299,000 VCU per year. So VCU is verified carbon unit. So one VCU is one carbon credit, okay? So every year, Kenyir will generate about 300,000 VCUs, okay? How much are VCUs traded at? Okay, right now, VCU from forestry project on average sells at about 5 USD, okay? 5 USD. For VCS CCB project, so where projects have other manfaat beyond carbon, it can go higher than 5 USD. There are examples of 8 USD, even 16 USD, because these projects generate a lot of co-benefits that the end buyer would like to buy or support. But for today's exercise, we will use 5 USD as the benchmark for lowest price, and also the predicted increase of carbon credit price over the next 30 years. So it's expected to raise from 5 USD to about 12 USD over 30 years. Okay. So this is it. This is the cumulative budget for the project over 30 years. Okay. If we consider at a 5 USD mark, there is a profit. We cover all the costs to manage the area for protection. But we also can generate a profit of about 4.5 million USD over 30 years. And if we look at the price index increase over 30 years from 5 to 12 USD, we can see an annual profit of USD 150,000 that also increases annually. And this will result in a cumulative profit of USD 34 million. So this chart shows secara kumulatif hasil kutipan from carbon credit, penjualan carbon credit, dan juga profit ataupun keuntungan after we minus the cost of managing the area for protection. Jadi we can do the enforcement work, protect it, work with communities, all that cost is covered, and some profit is generated over 30 years. Okay, so based on our assumption, based on our andaian, can be profitable, but at the very least we can cover the costs of managing for protection. Now we look at opportunity cost. Okay, yang ni memang maybe contentious sikit lah. But again, that's andaian, alright? Really just based on potential logging profit to the state government. Again, based on cutting limit over the last 12 years on an average. We want to assume that the state government makes about 8.6 million ringgit in profits a year from logging Kenyir, okay? About 4.4 thousand per hectare per year. We just use this as an estimate based on 12 years average from 2007 to 2018. If we compare back to our original chart, we can see that, the profit from carbon offset does not exceed the total profit from logging, okay? So carbon income in general will return about 43% less profits compared to logging over 30 years, okay? So over 30 years, if we, based on this assumption, the state government can profit about 60 million over 30 years from logging and only about 34 million from carbon profit, for example, okay? It's less, but we solve a few problems. You know, we said before this, Kerajaan is the one who bear the cost for protecting areas at their own, out of their own pocket expenses. So if we do develop a carbon offset project in Kenyir, we would be potentially able to secure funding from pihak swasta, private company, to cover the costs and also generate some profits, but not as much as logging, okay? Again, this is just based on avoided logging scenario, based on this projection of 5 USD per ton to 12 USD per ton. The other projections that say, you know, maybe 40 USD per ton. I wanted to be more conservative today and just show general trends based on highest possible budget and lowest possible assumption for hasil kutipan from carbon credit. Again, if we use other methods, for example, avoided deforestation, then there'll be more credits and more income. Some restoration projects are also can generate a lot more credits if successful. But just to show, this is what we see lah from Kenyir. So year 16 is when carbon income exceeds logging profit. So is it possible to protect Kenyir while generating profit? Okay, so you know there's reduced emissions of 11.2 million tons CO2, which helps our state, our country as well to achieve our, you know, to meet our climate commitment. We can protect biodiversity, you know, a bit more than 20 threatened mammal species and other important wildlife. We can use the fund to protect, you know, important tiger habitat. We can develop community programs as well, you know. So there will be a project budget of 1.3 million available per year, which generates about 8.9 million BCU credits, annual profit of 150,000 USD, and over 30 years about USD 34 million USD profit lah from this carbon offset project. But you may potentially lose 43% of opportunity cost from logging. But you know, it will be a new type of asset to the state government, not a production asset, but a protection asset. So something very new that has a lot of positive benefits for climate, for biodiversity, while also generating some profit lah. So this is just one example. So it's one contoh. We use Kenyir because we have some data on it as well, just to show the audience today how to develop a project, how to measure impact or manfaat. But you know, we can use this to look at the whole of Terengganu. Besides Kenyir, are there any other areas that we want to protect? Maybe you want to restore some areas, so we can use another method. Maybe you want to avoid conversion of some forests, then we can use another method. I think with the correct tools and knowledge, we can incorporate this type of thinking into land use planning to take into account emissions and see if we can develop carbon offset project in Terengganu lah. Again, before you start, remember there's a lot of steps. Okay, not just, hey, let's do carbon project, take 2 days. No. It takes a very long time, a lot of technical input. Your timing as well needs to be correct. Okay, so just now I shared this chart, which is a simplified version of what you need to do from concept to implementation. But if landowners or state government is really serious about developing carbon offset project, you know, there's a lot of steps. Number one is feasibility, you know, which area do we want to work with? We need to verify on the ground, what is the quality of the forest? Who are the communities? What are the conservation programs that exist? And then conduct a feasibility assessment like I showed today. And kedua, we go into project design and development, you know, what is the project wants to do? What is the legal framework? Engage the community, and then secure formal buy-in. So develop the agreements like I shared in topic 1. It's very important to acknowledge who the landowners are, who the project operator is there a transfer of carbon rights before we can go into project implementation. Even the implementation also, we need to make sure that we get the standards verification approved before we can start implementation. But yeah, that is my webinar today. Wanted to apply the knowledge we have learned over the last 3 weeks and use an interesting case study from Terengganu, which we use Kenyir today. And yeah, this is the end of my webinar. I just want to thank everyone for listening. And before we go into questions, just apologize if I use the wrong terms. Again, very technical topic with not a lot of bahasa words, so we had to try our best lah.